I was standing beside the cake, smiling while they all sang "Happy Birthday" like it wasn't forced. 80 years on this earth. Most of the people around me were here out of obligation, not love. You can always feel it. You learn not to show it. My niece, Alara, leaned in as everyone clapped and said loud enough for a few others to hear, "Hope you enjoy your last one." I turned to her and laughed. I planned to. But then she smirked, tilted her head like I was just an old joke, and added, "We're all just waiting on your will anyway." I smiled. I really smiled, and stood up slowly. "Good," I said, "because I finalized it this morning. I left everything to a dog shelter." The room went silent. Completely silent. You could hear the ceiling fan clicking above the awkwardness. I looked around, met every pair of stunned eyes, and said it again. "They're nicer than most of you." That was the moment everything changed. The house looked beautiful that day. Warm light came through the front windows, catching on the silver edges of the 80 balloons someone had taped above the fireplace. The table was full of food. Too much food. My son, Jalen, insisted on catering. He said it was more efficient, but I knew he didn't want me cooking again. The whole family had come. Not for me, at least not in the way that mattered. They came because missing an old woman's 80th birthday looks bad in family group chats and even worse in legal documents. I smiled anyway. I always have. Smiling became my armor after my husband Wesley passed away. It's easier than explaining the quiet that moved in after he left. Jalen brought his usual energy, just enough to look involved. He hugged me, checked his watch, and asked if the guest Wi-Fi still worked. His daughter, Sylvie, handed me a card she clearly made in the car, but she looked me in the eyes when she gave it to me. That mattered more than the glitter. Then there was Alara, my late sister's daughter. She was dressed like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover, hair sleek, eyes sharp, teeth too white to mean her smile. She helped herself to champagne before she said hello. She's always been that way, entitled, calculating, charming when it suits her. Maeve, my sister-in-law, gave me a stiff hug that smelled like hairspray and judgment. She walked around the living room like she was taking inventory. She's the kind of person who compliments your dress while adjusting your collar with a frown. Uncle Ronan, Wesley's brother, was already on his second glass of whiskey. He raised it to me across the room like we were in a bar. 80 and still kicking, he called out. Tough genes in the Ray women. I nodded and laughed, just enough to keep it easy. But my hands gripped the back of the dining chair a little tighter. Everyone was here. But no one asked how I was really doing. No one asked about the garden I'd spent the spring reviving. No one remembered that I stopped drinking 3 years ago. Not even Jalen. They just kept glancing at the old paintings, the antique clock, the piano Wesley used to play after dinner. I used to think I'd be surrounded by love at this age. I imagined a home filled with stories and gratitude. But instead, I was hosting people who only saw me as a gatekeeper to something they believed was theirs. The air felt heavy with politeness and fake laughter. Even the candles on the cake flickered like they wanted to blow themselves out. I stood at the kitchen sink for a moment before the cake came out. I looked down at my hands, hands that had held babies, signed mortgage papers, wiped away my own tears without help. I whispered to myself, "You're still here. They don't get to define the end of you." When I turned back around, they were all in the dining room waiting, or maybe circling. Either way, I was ready. They didn't know it yet, but this birthday wasn't going to be about cake or photos or fake toasts. It was going to be about truth. After the cake was served and the candles had been blown out, everyone settled into their usual corners of the house. The energy shifted. They had performed the celebration. Now came the real reason they showed up, proximity to the estate. Alara floated from room to room with her glass of champagne, asking surface-level questions wrapped in sugar. "So, Auntie, do you still have that antique rug from Morocco? It must be worth a fortune." I told her yes, it was still there. She smiled and said, "You always had such exquisite taste. I can only hope it stays in the family." That wasn't a compliment. It was a request dressed up as flattery. The rug was something I brought back from my honeymoon with Wesley. She didn't know that. She never asked. She just wanted to make sure it stayed in reach. I walked into the hallway and paused by the guest bathroom. The door was slightly open. Inside, Maeve stood with Jalen. They didn't see me. Maeve whispered, "You're her only son. If she had any sense, she'd leave it all to you." Alara thinks she's the favorite, but you're the bloodline. Jalen sighed. Mom's hard to read. She might just give it all to charity. She's been different lately. Then you better start showing up more, Maeve said sharply, before someone else gets clever. I stepped back without a sound and returned to the kitchen. I'd just been discussed like I wasn't breathing down the hall. That kind of thing used to hurt me. It doesn't anymore. It sharpens me. Later, when I passed by Uncle Ronan in the living room, he patted the ottoman beside him. Come sit, Miriam. Let's talk about that gorgeous piano. That's the same one Wes used to play, right? Still works? I sat, but didn't answer right away. He continued, My son Liam has taken up piano, you know. Maybe it should stay in the Ray name, eh? I looked at him. You're welcome to visit and hear it any time, he chuckled. That's not what I meant. I know, I said. Back in the kitchen, Sylvie helped clear the plates without being asked. She didn't say much, but she kept glancing at me like she was watching the way people move when they're trying to pretend. I appreciated that. At least one of them seemed to be paying attention to something deeper than wallpaper and wine. After she left the kitchen, I looked out the window. Tilly, my old beagle mix, was asleep in the sun on the porch. That little dog had stayed beside me through every lonely holiday and every cold morning. When I cried, she climbed into my lap. When I laughed, she wagged her tail like it was the best sound in the world. No one else in that house had ever cared how I felt unless it affected what they might lose. Alara caught me at the dining room table later. She leaned down and said, You know, you should really think about writing the will soon. You never know what could happen. I looked up. What do you mean? I just mean, it's smart to be prepared and fair. You always said family matters. I did say that. She smiled. Then I added, but I've also said love is louder than blood. Her smile faded just a little. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Every glance at my belongings was a calculation. Every joke about my age was a reminder that my clock was ticking. Every interaction was filtered through their own self-interest. They weren't mourning the idea of losing me. They were budgeting for it. And something about that gave me more clarity than I'd had in years. The morning of my birthday, I woke up before the sun rose. The house was still, the kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. Tilly was curled up beside me on the bed, her warm breath rising and falling against my leg. I rested my hand on her back and took a deep breath. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was clear in a way I hadn't been since Wesley's funeral. That day, people showed up for the ceremony, the food, the speeches. But I remember watching how quickly they moved on, how fast they returned to their own lives, only checking on me when it made them feel good to do so. That morning, I stood in the kitchen in my robe, made a cup of black tea, and stared at the framed photo of me and Wesley from our trip to the Grand Canyon. We were younger, brighter. That woman in the photo believed in the best of people. The one holding the tea had learned to believe in what people showed her, not what she hoped was true. By 9 a.m., I was dressed and sitting in front of my lawyer, Mr. Kessler. He had known me since Jalen was born. I'd updated my will once after Wesley passed, but I hadn't touched it since. Until now. I'd like to change my beneficiaries, I said. Kessler looked surprised. All of them. Yes, everything. He paused. Are you sure about this, Miriam? I've never been more sure. We spent an hour reviewing documents, updating listings, and reassigning ownership. I left the house, the furniture, the accounts, and the life insurance to the Silvertail Canine Sanctuary. It's a rescue in rural Pennsylvania that rehabilitates senior and abandoned dogs. I'd visited them once after finding Tilly online. They called her unadoptable. She was 10 years old and had a heart murmur. I adopted her on the spot. When we finished, Kessler handed me a pen to sign the final page. Would you like to write a personal statement? He asked. Something to attach for the family? Yes, I said. I wrote 5 short letters, not long, not angry, just honest. To Jalen, I raised you with everything I had. I'm proud of the man you became, but I needed more than financial updates. I needed my son. To Alara, charm doesn't excuse cruelty. I hope you learn the difference someday. To Maeve, you never saw me as an equal. You saw me as a rival, but I wasn't playing. To Ronan, the piano was never yours to want. It was his. You should have known that. To Sylvie, you looked at me with kindness when no one else did. That matters more than you know. Tilly and I will leave you the piano. Learn to play something gentle. When I left the office, I walked home slowly. The sky was clear. The streets felt quiet in the way I needed them to be. This wasn't revenge. It was realignment. I had spent most of my life trying to earn love through giving. But giving without respect isn't generosity. It's sacrifice. And I wasn't going to spend my final years handing out pieces of myself to people who had already decided I was just a placeholder for property. By the time I got home, the guests were already arriving. I hung up my coat, fed Tilly, brushed a strand of hair into place in the hallway mirror, and put on my earrings, the pearl ones Wesley gave me on our 15th anniversary. I smiled at my reflection, not out of pride, but out of peace. I had done something for myself, finally, and they had no idea what was coming. After the meal, after the polite chatter and the stiff toasts, the family circled around me in the dining room for the final part of the celebration, cake. A camera phone was already recording. Someone put a party hat on my head. I smiled, but my thoughts were already elsewhere. They sang the song, clapping awkwardly, slightly off-key. As they finished, I looked across the table at each face, my son, my niece, my sister-in-law, my late husband's brother, and my granddaughter. Each person held some version of expectation. It wasn't about me. Not really. It was about what came after me. When I finished blowing out the candles, Alara leaned in close enough for her perfume to sting my nose. She smiled with too many teeth and said just loudly enough for the others to hear, "Hope you enjoy your last one." I turned to her, met her eyes, and let out a calm, steady laugh. I planned to. She wasn't done. "We're all just waiting on your will anyway," she added with a sip of her champagne. That was my moment. I stood, slow but certain. My knees ached, but my spine was straight. I looked down at her, then across the room. "Good," I said, "because I finalized it this morning." A pause. Confused glances. "I left everything to a dog shelter." The room froze. I heard someone set their fork down. Jalen stiffened in his chair, blinking like he'd misheard. Maeve's mouth parted, but no words came. Alara narrowed her eyes as if it were a joke she hadn't been warned about. "You what?" she asked, her voice tightening. "I left everything to the Silvertail Canine Sanctuary. Home, accounts, heirlooms, everything." "Is that legal?" Ronan muttered, half to himself. "They're nicer than most of you," I said. That wasn't a jab. That was the truth. I delivered it plainly, without a tremor in my voice. I let the silence grow. Let it land. "You're joking," Alara said, laughing nervously. "You're not serious. That's ridiculous." "No," I replied, still standing. "What's ridiculous is spending my life giving, only to watch people measure me in dollar signs and dining sets." Jalen stood slowly. "Mom, you can't really mean this. You're upset. This isn't you." I turned to him. "It is. This is me without the filter you prefer." Maeve stepped in next, smoothing her napkin. "You've misunderstood us. We care about you." I looked her straight in the eyes. "You care about what I can give you, not what I feel." Alara stood, crossing her arms. "So, you're just cutting us all out? After everything?" I took a breath. "I'm not cutting you out. I'm letting myself in. I chose to give what I've built to a place that has never once asked me when I plan to die. They just asked if I'd visit." Sylvie didn't speak. She stared at me with wide eyes. Then she looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "I did leave one thing behind," I added. "The piano. Sylvie, it's yours if you want it." She nodded once, without a smile. She looked like she might cry, but she didn't. That restraint told me more than words. I sat back down. No applause, no more laughter. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room. They didn't know what to do with me anymore, and I had never felt more in control. The party ended quickly after that. Nobody said they were leaving, but within 20 minutes the room was nearly empty. Jalen made an excuse about needing to take a work call. Maeve gathered her purse and coat with tight lips. Ronan poured himself one last drink, then muttered something about needing time to process. Alara stood by the front door for a long moment, pretending to check her phone. I think she was waiting for me to say it was all a mistake. I didn't. She left without saying goodbye. Sylvie was the last one out. She lingered near the living room, lightly touching the keys of the piano I'd left her. She didn't play, just placed her hand there, then looked at me. "Thank you," she said softly. I nodded. "Come by any time. That piano has more music left in it than people realize." She smiled, a real one, then left. After they were gone, I took off my earrings, let my hair down, and stepped outside with Tilly. She wagged her tail, completely unaware of the drama inside, but somehow perfectly in tune with me. We sat on the porch together while the sun lowered across the yard. It felt different than I expected. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just quiet, free. For years, I carried the weight of obligation like it was proof of love. I baked the cakes, hosted the dinners, paid for repairs, remembered birthdays no one else remembered. And each time they showed up late, or not at all, each time they forgot something I had mentioned with my whole heart, I told myself it was just family being busy, being distracted, being human. But deep down, I knew better. I just didn't want to admit it, because admitting it meant facing a harder truth. I wasn't loved the way I deserved. That day, I stopped pretending, not out of bitterness, out of self-respect. The following week, I received a handwritten letter from Silvertail Canine Sanctuary. The director, a woman named Cassandra, thanked me with such sincerity I had to sit down to read it. She wrote about the dogs they'd be able to save, senior dogs abandoned after their owners died, dogs with arthritis and cloudy eyes who still wagged their tails. She said they were building a new wing and wanted to name it Miriam's Porch. That made me cry, not because I gave them money, but because someone saw me, the woman who'd spent most of her life being useful but rarely acknowledged. A week after that, Sylvie came by again. No fanfare, no announcement. She just showed up with flowers from her college's garden and asked if she could sit and talk. We had tea. She asked about Wesley, about how I met him, about why I loved Tilly so much. She didn't bring up the will. She didn't have to. Her presence was enough. As for the others, they stayed quiet. Jalen sent a single text. "Hope you're okay. Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. Maybe someday. Maybe not. I'm not angry. I'm awake. I've learned that it's not selfish to want joy that isn't transactional. It's not wrong to leave behind more than valuables. You can leave behind a boundary, a statement, a legacy that says, "I mattered." Not for what I gave, but for who I was. If there's one thing I'd want anyone listening to remember, it's this. You don't owe your peace to people who only show up to inherit it. You owe it to yourself. And if that peace comes wagging its tail and sleeping at your feet, then maybe, just maybe, you found a kind of love that never had conditions to begin with. Thank you for listening to my story. If it made you think about what we leave behind and who we leave it to, then I hope it stays with you long after this video ends. If you've ever had to choose between doing what's expected and doing what's right for your peace, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your own story. I read everyone. If this story meant something to you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true life stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what really matters. Until next time, take care of your heart, your home, and your peace.